Hello everybody, welcome back to another video by Jay Bowman. Today I'm looking again at one of my favourite synthesizers, the Kodamo Mask1. And I'm going to be aided in this by my oscilloscope, which I'll just put on the screen there, so hopefully you can see that. And it's going to be a bit of a different video today. I thought it would be interesting to have a bit of a philosophical discussion, shall we say, about the Mask1 and about bitmasking synthesis. What is it? What does it mean? What is the basis of it? And I should probably start this video by saying I'm not affiliated with Kodamo, the manufacturers of the synthesizer, at all. I really respect and appreciate what they've done with the two synths which they've produced, which I owned, the Mask1 and the Essence FM. I love both of these synthesizers and I've followed the development of the Mask1 very closely, but as I say, I'm not connected with Kodamo in any way, and I have no inside information about the synthesizer or the method of synthesis either. And I think it would be, I don't want this to come across as presumptuous in terms of me saying what they should do or trying to analyze what they have done. This is just me as a synth enthusiast talking about what I think the essence of this Mask1 is and what it could be or how it could be developed in the future. The other thing I should say is that I'm not a mathematician, I'm not an engineer or a programmer, so I have no idea about what's going on underneath the hood of this synthesizer. I've got no idea in terms of practical programming how bitmasking synthesis works. All I know is I appreciate the sounds that it makes, and I'd like to try and talk about how the sounds it makes can be used in sound design, and what I'm going to call, for slightly tongue-in-cheek for the purposes of this video, the 3 dimensions of bitmask synthesis. So this is what this video is going to be about. I'm going to talk about and do some practical demonstrations of the 3 dimensions of bitmask synthesis. So just to give a brief overview, I think the first dimension of bitmask synthesis is the essence of the bitmasks themselves, the different tones they generate. There was originally 256, now there's the 512 different bitmasks. So the first dimension is using those individual bitmasks in sound design and how you can generate sounds patches using those bitmasks. The second dimension is going to be talking about the envelopes, and in particular the looping delta envelopes that enable you to change between different bitmasks. So let's say the first dimension is the kind of static sound of individual bitmasks. The second dimension is the ability to change between different bitmasks. Obviously each bitmask is discrete. There's some kind of element of less significant bits between each bitmasks that you can hear in certain circumstances, but generally it's a transition between discrete bitmasks. So that is the second dimension. And both the first dimension and the second dimension are implemented pretty well in the Mask1 as we currently have it. Now, the third dimension that I want to talk about is the ability to change the rate at which you morph between different bitmasks. So that is what I would call the third dimension, and I think that is the potential for future development of this synthesizer and this synthesis method. So that is the outline of what I'm going to talk about. Let's get started. I'm going to talk about now the first dimension of bitmask synthesis. Okay, so let's talk about what I'm calling, for the purposes of this video, the first dimension of bitmask synthesis. And for an explanation of that, let's look at the Kodamo website. So they say there, they have a question: how does bitmask synthesis work? And the answer is, a sine wave is split into different sections that are repeated, scaled, inverted or silenced to build a new waveform, all of this by inputting a single number. So let's look at that practically. The way it works is you have an init patch, you push oscillator 1, oscillator 2, the first option is mask. So you're starting with the default mask shape, which is this sawtooth wave as it appears on the front panel, or kind of a down ramp wave as it looks on the oscilloscope. So that is the kind of, by making that choice, Kodamo seemed to be pointing you towards using this synthesizer as a virtual analog synth, because obviously a sawtooth wave is the basis for filtering a sound, because the sawtooth starts with all the harmonics and you use the filter to take them out, and it's the kind of familiar traditional sound that you will get when you turn on an analog synthesizer, and for that reason it's generally the same with a virtual analog synthesizer. So the first dimension of bitmask synthesis works by using the bitmasks as an oscillator and then manipulating the timbre that you get from that bitmask using the filter, using the LFOs to add vibrato or tremolo or other effects, using the two effects that you've got in the unit. You might use some pitch envelope, you've got the noise, etc. But generally you are using the bitmask as a kind of basis for a subtractive or standard analog, virtual analog type of sound. And I've done a couple of videos recently, which I'll put a link to here, both of which explore sound design on the Mask1 from that perspective. So I did a video making an ambient patch where the base layer of the sound, the core tone, was made using synthesis techniques that you could use on many analog or virtual analog synthesizers. So it's a kind of pad using the filter. It is a layered sound though, so on top of that basic sound there was a degree of what I'm going to call in this video second dimension bitmasking synthesis, because the layered sound had some movement between different bitmasks. But the main core of the tone was just using a bitmask. I think I either used number 7 or 15, I can't quite remember, and then filtering that and adding some effects and maybe a bit of movement using the LFOs. And the Mask1 does that kind of sound very well. And another video that I've done recently which did a similar thing was looking at how you can use some of the more unusual bitmasks to come up with a kind of FM bass type of sound from the Mask1. And again, the art there of the sound design was in selecting between the different bitmasks rather than modulating between bitmasks, which is what I'm calling for this video second dimension bitmask synthesis. So that seems to be quite straightforward, and you'd say yes, this dimension of bitmask synthesis is implemented very well in the Mask1. I think there might be one or two other synthesizers that use a similar technique, possibly in terms of bitmasking. I did see a reference to a modular synthesizer, which I think is monophonic, and possibly there's a VST that does something similar as well, I don't know. But certainly in terms of polysynths, I think the Mask1 is the only synth using this technology. And as I say, for first dimension bitmask synthesis, you choose your mask from the 512 bitmasks there are. You then manipulate that using LFOs, filter, etc. You might blend it, you might have different bit masks on the two oscillators, and that lets you come up with a sound, and as I say, that is implemented very well on the Mask1. I do have a couple of questions though. I suppose I would like to understand more about the method of bit masking, and I think I've mentioned this before, but let's just show it again. If I go to the tuner on the oscilloscope here, and let's go to this sawtooth wave, and let's play it at standard pitch. So I think you can see there that the tone is jittering. It's not completely stable as you might expect with a digital synthesizer oscillator. If I raise the volume of oscillator 2, that's playing a sawtooth wave as well, and you can hear that they're not completely in tune with each other. You're getting some phasing. And if I repeatedly play the note, you can hear that different voices are out of tune with each other to a different degree. So you get that beating at different amounts. So that, I think, is unusual for a digital synthesizer to have that as the default sound of the waves. There is no method currently of making the oscillators play completely stably in tune, which for some people would probably regard that as a good thing, because I think a lot of people put a lot of effort into, when they get a digital synthesizer, into making it sound more analog, whereas with the Mask1 you have that kind of analog kind of effect built in. As I say, I'd like to know more about bitmask synthesis. Is that something inherent in the way that bit masking works that makes the voices unstable in that way? From my perspective, from a sound design perspective, I would like as an option to have the choice to either have that kind of fluctuating tone or a completely stable tone, because both options give you different choices and different results when you're kind of blending voices, for example. But yes, so question, is that something inherent in bitmask synthesis? I also wonder about the description they've given. So from the description on the website that I read out, that suggests that somewhere under the hood, the default sound is a sine wave, which is then manipulated to make all the different bit masks. Now, if that is the case, I'm slightly curious why there is bitmask 31, which is itself a sine wave. How is that being treated? How is the sine wave being manipulated in a way that produces a sine wave? Maybe that's an obvious answer for someone who knows about, it's an obvious question for someone who knows something about bit masking synthesis, but that just struck me. And I think logically I can see why they default to mask 7, the sawtooth wave, as the default wave when you turn on the bit mask, turn on the Mask1, because it's just, most people are more familiar in a virtual analog synthesizer in using a sawtooth or starting off with a sawtooth wave. But that suggests a kind of choice on the designer's perspective. Why start with bitmask 7? If it was an FM synthesizer like their Essence FM, then you would expect the default wave to be 31, and that might affect people's perception of the instrument and how it works. So they've obviously made a choice there in going with the sawtooth wave to start with. But then I have other questions, like there seems to be a there are a series of 16 bit masks which are harmonically related to each other or timbrally related to each other, and then there's a jump when you go to the next series of 16. Again, I would really like to understand more about that and what it is about the method that produces these kind of series, and why the masks are in the order that they are, etc., etc. I'm just curious about that. So if I play from 0, so that's 0 to 15, that's one series. Then if we go to jump to 16, you can hear there's a kind of jump in the harmonic relationship of the bit masks. (16 to 31) is the same, then there's a jump to 32. I'm going to go up an octave. I mean, that's another question I have about the way that different bit masks play at different octaves, but again, I'll just carry on with this. So 32 going up. So 32 to 48 is one series. Let's do that again. Okay, and starting from 49. And so on. So those are some of the questions I have about the kind of basic first dimension bit masking synthesis. But I think I've probably explored or gone into as much detail as is necessary on this dimension. It's the most basic element of bitmask synthesis. You just turn on the Mask1, you put a bit of filter on, a bit of vibrato, and a second voice. Maybe detune them a bit further. Bit of reverb. And chorus. And there you go. So that's the first dimension of bitmask synthesis. Okay, now I'd like to talk about the second, or what I'm calling for the purposes of this video, the second dimension of bitmask synthesis. So by this I mean moving between different bit masks as part of sound design in a patch. And the interesting thing is, when the Mask1 was released, I think it did have this concept of the delta envelopes in each oscillator, and you can see from the front panel there for oscillator 1, it's got a delta mask envelope. Same for oscillator 2, delta mask envelope. So it was always envisaged that you would have this ability to transition between different bit masks from when the synthesizer was released. So in each oscillator menu, you have a start point and a speed. So starting from mask 7, let's, if we go up 8, then I know we're going from 7 to 15, which is the half sign. And if I turn this, sorry, 8 there on the start point, if I turn the speed right down, that's going very slowly, but it is gradually coming down from 15 towards 7. I think it probably didn't even get properly through from 15 to 14 there. You were hearing some of the least significant bits between 15 and 14. If I turn up the speed to 3, there, you just heard the whole transition. So that's quite an interesting sound, and it's, as a lot of people have made this comparison, it's got similarities to wavetable synthesis, although there's no interpolation, or there's not the kind of same degree of blending between different waves or bit masks in this case, as you would expect from a modern wavetable synthesizer. I think the first video I ever made with this synthesizer was playing with that kind of sound, the kind of transition between the bit masks. And that is an interesting sound, and I think it's fairly unique. It doesn't sound exactly like anything else. I mean, I suppose if you had a kind of wave sequencing, wave sequencer that was sequencing the bit masks or oscillator shapes similar to the bit mask on another synthesizer, then you might get something similar. But possibly the unique aspect comes from the fact that there is this series of 16 bit masks, and at the moment you can't go outside the series. You can't. I mean, with the LFO, I suppose if it's in up ramp or down ramp, you will get sections where you'll jump, and the same with some of the looping aspects. But you're kind of in this series of 512 bit masks. They're in the order they're in. You can't rearrange that order, so in some ways it's quite inflexible, and I think that gives it part of the distinctive sound. That you get when you are using this second dimension of bitmask synthesis. So that you could do when the Mask1 was first released, and then in a firmware update they added the ability to loop the envelopes. So as you've just seen from the example I just played where I wasn't looping the envelope, it was possible to use this second dimension of bitmask synthesis without looping envelopes. You would just know that the transition would come to an end and you would find a final resting place. So that was always possible, but I think for many people who first played the Mask1 in that arrangement or with that ability, the possibility of having looping bit masks was something that was very tempting, because you know, when you've got a sustained sound like this, it can be a shame for the sustained amplitude of the oscillator to carry on playing, but the kind of interesting second dimension, what I'm calling it, of bitmask, as in the transition through the bitmask, comes to an end, and then you're just left with the bare tone. So Kodamo took the step of adding looping bitmasks, and they did it in a great way. So there's two ways you can loop. You can either so when you go to the option of loop, you have the choice of either just a straight yes, in which case it's a kind of cyclical looping, as you can hear there, it's just going through the cycle and then starting again from the start point and then starting again. So you've got that option for looping, or you've got bidirectional. I should point out you always had the option to use the LFO to modulate mask shape, but that again is a different character, because the LFOs are free running, so you can't guarantee where you would start off when you press the key if you're using the LFO to modulate the bit mask shape. Whereas using the delta envelopes, it's completely consistent. And there are other differences between the LFOs and the delta envelopes, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but suffice to say that the looping envelopes have some significant advantages over the LFOs. So you could combine the delta envelopes with the ADSR envelopes. And the filter, of course. So that's just an example of the kind of thing you can do. Let's explore another feature of the second dimension of bitmask synthesis. So you can, these looping delta envelopes go into audio rates. And I've done 2 recent videos where I did 2 no talking videos where I just had a session trying to focus on exploring audio rate modulation of the bitmasks using the looping envelopes. So I'm not going to go into as much detail as I went to in those videos, but just to give you a demonstration of how that can sound. So if we go to the start point, and in fact, something I noticed doing those videos is if you go to mask 31, which is the sine wave, and let's raise the semitone. There seems to be a glitch between 31 and 32 that produces interesting results when you go over that kind of, it's almost like a ditch or a hole in the sound using a looping envelope. So if you look at the oscilloscope, So as you can hear from that, you can produce some really interesting tones. They're somewhat reminiscent of ring modulation or distortion. And that aspect of the second dimension of bitmask synthesis is implemented pretty well so far in the Mask1. There's some improvements I would like to see, or some requests I've made for future firmware updates. For example, I think it would be really useful to be able to tempo sync the delta envelopes so that the rate would change with the key, because sometimes you come up with interesting harmonics. And it would be good for that to track the keyboard. So that's one thing I'd like to see. I'd also like to see some more options in terms of the delta envelopes. For example, if you wanted to just flick between two masks, then there might be an option just to alternate between the base mask and the start of the delta envelope, rather than going through the whole series in between them. That would be interesting. So I've made a request for that, and yeah, there's a couple of other tweaks that I think they can make that would make that more useful, because at the moment you do produce some happy accidents, but giving you a bit more control over the delta masks would make that more useful. So that is the second dimension of bitmask synthesis. As I say, I think it's implemented quite well so far in the Mask1. There's possibly a few areas where they could tweak it to make it even better. But what I want to do now is move on to talk about the third dimension of bitmask synthesis, which you could call the final frontier, and that's going to be the next part of this video. Okay, I'm now going to talk about what I'm calling, for the purposes of this video, the third dimension of bitmask synthesis, the final frontier. So we've talked about the first dimension, which is just using individual bit masks for sound design, using them as kind of static operators, as you would in use as a starting point in analog or virtual analog synth. I then talked about the second dimension of bitmask synthesis, which is modulating between different bit masks at a set rate, using the delta envelopes in particular. You could also use the LFOs, I didn't get into that for various reasons, but that is the second dimension of bitmask synthesis. So now, what I'm calling the third dimension of bitmask synthesis is the ability to modulate the delta envelopes while you're playing. I think that would bring a new degree of expressivity and potential to the whole concept of bitmask synthesis. So why do I say that? So I did a couple of videos recently, I've mentioned, I'll link to them again, where I was exploring audio rate modulation of the bit masks. And there's something I noticed there, which was if you come up with tones and using audio rate modulation, using the delta envelopes at audio rate, and then if you change the rate or change the start point of the envelope while you're playing, that in itself gives an interesting sound design aspect, changing the timbre in that way. And that, I think, would be fairly unique. And maybe to illustrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to stop talking in a bit and just show you talking through some patches. But first, to explain what I would like to see. So I would like to see I would like to see the ability to modulate start point and delta envelope speed through the LFOs, through all of the modulation options, so through velocity, through aftertouch and the mod wheel. I think that would be great. I think what would be even better would be if they could add in the modulation section an additional envelope. So the Mask1 is quite unusual in that it has 4 envelopes already, or 4 ADSR envelopes already, so one for each oscillator, or the amplitude of each oscillator, one for the amplitude of the noise, and one for the filter. But there's no dedicated modulation envelope in an ADSR fashion. Obviously, there's the pitch delta envelope and the delta envelopes for bit masks in the oscillators. So if they added an ADSR looping modulation envelope in the mod section, which ideally could be targeted at any of the existing things you can modulate, but I think where that would really push the synth into a new dimension is if that could be used to modulate the start point and the speed of the bit mask delta envelopes. Now in theory you could already do this in MIDI, because you could set up a MIDI envelope which would target those options. Unfortunately I don't have an easy way of doing that. What I do have, so I can't really prove my theory in terms of what that would add to the synth. What I do have is an Expressive E Touché, which hopefully you can see on the screen there. And using this, which I'm having to put off camera unfortunately, using the Touché, I can use this to modulate various parameters, including start time and start point and rate of the delta envelope. So I've got a patch here which I've set up to work with the Touché, which hopefully will demonstrate some of what I'm talking about on the potential for this third dimension of modulation in the terms of bit masking, which is modulating the start point and the rate of the delta envelopes. So I think that shows some of the expressive potential of being able to modulate the start point and the rate using envelopes, using the mod wheel, using LFOs, using everything, aftertouch, etc. That would be really good. It does make me speculate about a future Mask 2, for example, which had a built-in touché in the same way that the Polybrute does. I mean, I know these are all French companies, so maybe that would be a possibility. That would be an amazing instrument from my perspective. But anyway, that was just a bit of a departure for me, just to go into that video, kind of break down how I see bitmask synthesis, how I use it, and how I'd like to see it develop in the future. As I say, I don't mean any disrespect to Kodamo. I really love what they've done with this instrument, and by me pointing out things that I would like to see them implement in future, I'm not trying to detract from the instrument as it currently is, because I think it's an outstanding synthesizer. You can use it to make great music, amazing sounds, and it's a wonderful thing as it is. I'm really encouraged by the way that they have made firmware updates to both Mask1 and the Essence FM to make them even better, and they seem to be constantly working on them. So you could view this video as a bit of an intervention on my part, possibly, to try and give them at least some ideas of how I would like to see the potential of bitmask synthesis develop. But as I say, I've got no idea of what's going on behind the scenes at the company. I don't know what's going on under the hood in the synthesizer. I'm just approaching it from the perspective of a fan and someone who likes to mess with synthesizers and make sounds. So if you've made it this far through the video, thank you very much for watching. Please give me a like and a subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and hopefully I will catch you on the next video. Goodbye.